Hi guys, and in today's video, we're going to be doing some Reddit stories. Our category is what is the most disturbing thing that's ever happened in your life? Full credit to Baby Jamie 1. I would not be doing this if I hadn't seen his videos. I absolutely love them, and I figured I'd give them a shot myself. And without further ado, let's get into our first story. Every time I stay at my grandma's house, I hear someone walking upstairs. It starts at one side of the room, casually walks to the other, and stops. This will happen maybe twice a night. I didn't start hearing it until I was about 14, when my grandparents made me start sleeping in a different room on the first floor because they started sleeping in separate bedrooms. Blah blah blah, regardless, both of their rooms are also on the first floor. For a little backstory, I've always been afraid of the upstairs at their house. I don't know why, but it's always freaked me out, and I refuse to even go up there alone. 23 now, and I still won't go up there alone. There's one room specifically, though. It's a long, narrow bedroom. When you open the door, there are closets on your left and right, a bed placed roughly in the middle of the room, and a window on the far opposite side of the door. I was told growing up by my grandparents that the sons of the previous owners claimed to see a gorilla come out of the closet at night, dance around the room, and then go back in the closet. I thought nothing of this story until I had to start sleeping in the other room. The room is located directly below the scary room upstairs. So we all headed to bed for the night. All the lights in the house are off, and I'm still awake lying in bed. Then I hear it. Thump, thump, thump. Starting at one end of the room, upstairs. It got closer to me, passed right above me, and continued to the end of the room, where it stopped. I'm wide awake, terrified out of my mind. There was no question in me that I had heard footsteps. I knew that slow, casual pace. I was freaked out and went to my grandparents' room. I told them what I heard, and he told me that the house is old and it creaks. But he did end up turning on the dining room light for me, so I felt a little safer. I tried going back to sleep. Then it started again, this time from where it ended, the first time, by the window upstairs. It walks over me again and stops at the door. I thought it was over until 5 seconds later when I heard it coming down the stairs. One, two, three, 4, 5. Silence as it walked further. Then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and silence again. As it reached the first floor, I was frozen in shock. Whatever it was on my floor of the house now, and sadly unaffected by the dining room light. I was staring at the doorway to my room. The dining room light was shining in, and my vision began to distort. I felt dizzy with fear, so I pulled the blankets over my head and suddenly heard a scratching sound from inside my room. I knew exactly where the scratches were coming from. It was my grandpa's gun case. It was a very obvious sound, scratching on the wood, long scratches down the front of the gun case door. I could even hear the door ever so slightly tapping against the frame as each scratch began. I tried to scream, and I couldn't. I took a second to take a deep breath and let out a scream. In seconds, my grandpa had made it to my room, and I was relieved. Needless to say, he still didn't believe me, so I did what any normal person would do. I draped a sheet over the side of the bed to sleep underneath it. I wrapped myself tight in a comforter, put on headphones, and turned my back to the door. There could be a party of ghosts in my room, and I would never even know. The next morning, my grandpa told my grandma about what had happened the night before. She said, "Oh, that's silly. You know, your cousin woke me up the last time she stayed here. She came into my room saying, 'I hear footsteps.' I slept under the bed the rest of my week there. I've stayed there countless times since that happened, and I hear the footsteps every time. I sleep on top of the bed now, but I keep my back to the door and sleep with headphones on. I haven't heard it come down the stairs since that first night, but if it does, I don't want to know." Okay, so I don't know what's up with this guy. Me personally, I would never have my back turned to the door if I'm worried that something's gonna come in. Like, I want to have as much time as possible to react to something coming in the door. And I wouldn't have headphones in either, because then, like, what if it opens the door? I have headphones in. I don't hear it. Why would I want to dull all of my senses? Like, how am I going to protect myself? And why would you continue to stay there? What, like, no. No thank you. No thanks. Okay. Well, that was that story. It was a little short, and there's no updates. So, hope that guy's doing well. So, my uncle used to work a lot when I was younger. He's done a lot of different things to make money, but one consistent thing that he would do in the summer into the fall months is paint houses. It's a legitimate business and everything. He's got a truck with a number and a name, and supplies in the back, all the works. Every now and then he would call my dad when he needed a little extra help, and I'd work for him. No big deal, really. It's just painting houses. What could possibly go wrong, I asked myself. Well, it takes a while to paint a whole house. If the weather conditions aren't right, you can't paint. One particular fall was extremely wet. It rained for what felt like every single day. My uncle would paint multiple houses at a time, so sometimes he would get caught up due to situations like these, and I'd work a little more than usual. That was fine by me, though. The job wasn't hard and it paid well. Anyways, it was a warm day for late fall, but there was still a distinct chill in the air, one that kind of penetrated through you and stung your soul. My uncle had this job he had to finish. It was an old Victorian house in a quiet part of town. A lady and her husband, who was an author, lived there. Due to the weather, it had taken longer than expected to paint the house, and there were family issues going on at the time, which further complicated things. So my uncle gets a call one day from the lady who lives at the house. She says her husband is trying to write his next book, but he keeps getting distracted by the scaffolding outside the house. So she asked if he could come and finish the job as soon as possible. My uncle was always an honest businessman. They had contracted him to do the job in midsummer, but he had lots of jobs that summer, and the wet conditions I mentioned above made it difficult to finish anything. However, these people were insistent but really polite, and not wanting to lose a customer or get a bad review, my uncle decided to put the house as a high priority. After all, it would only take a day or two to finish. So we show up to this house mid-afternoon. Like I said, it was a weird kind of chilly day, and I remembered a really eerie clamminess that washed over me. The day was slightly overcast, so everything was shrouded in gray. It was like the perfect setting for a mysterious crime novel. So we arrived at his house, and my uncle and I moved to the back. The front of the house had already been done, so there was nothing left there. My uncle, being the more experienced painter, would always do the touch ups, and I would simply apply the first coats, since they took little skill. Anyway, we get to the back of the house, and he asked me if I'm scared of heights. I was 17 at the time, and although they do creep me out a little, I didn't want to seem like a child in front of my uncle, so I told him I wasn't. He was happy to hear that. He has me climb up the scaffolding to the third floor to finish an upper section of the house. There was a window up there, a small little oval one, that looked into the attic. The attic also happened to be the husband's study. He would do most of his writing in there. So I climbed up the scaffolding, cans of paint dangling behind me, and various paintbrushes and other tools in my utility belt. My uncle let me borrow. I get to the top of the scaffolding and set all my supplies down. I crack open a can of paint and start painting like I had a few hundred times before. Outside of the temperature, the overcast, and the eerie calm, this day was like any other. I'm working my way across the top parts of the house when I get to the window that looks into the study. I bend down, dip my paintbrush, and stand back up to paint above the window. The window was in my direct line of sight, and I couldn't help but gaze in. I see a man, the husband, staring back at me with a face completely barren of any emotion. I had never seen a face so devoid of feeling before. I still haven't. Of course, I get startled and take a step back. I chuckled and smiled at the guy, but he doesn't smile back. Instead, while remaining completely emotionless, he draws a pistol up to his head that he was holding in his hand the whole time and proceeds to blow his brains out without ever breaking eye contact. I couldn't believe that he had done this right in front of me while I'm staring at him. In utter shock, I gasped and let out a small scream as I stepped back in fear, only I had stepped back a little too much and fell off the scaffolding. Alerted by the gunshot, my uncle looked up in just enough time to see me fall off the scaffolding from the third story. I was lucky enough to land in a bush and only suffer a broken ankle and a few scratches. The biggest wounds happened in my head. I had gotten a concussion from the fall. It's been years since then, and I still remember the man's face. I've never forgotten it. It will always be burned into the back of my head. I know why. Looking back, his face was so devoid of emotion. Because he never felt any emotion at all. He literally didn't care about what he was doing. As it turns out, the man was seriously depressed and facing mental issues. I guess he decided he couldn't take it anymore. His wife moved out of the house shortly after, and we never finished the job. To this day, that house remains abandoned, and to this day, I try not to drive down that street it's on. I'm scared that if I do, and happen to pass the backyard, I'll see the man staring back at me from the window, cold and emotionless. So these stories are from Reddit. I don't know if they're true or not, but like, if they are true, congratulations on following 3 stories and only breaking your ankle. That's very impressive. I guess you also did get a concussion, but wow, only a broken ankle from a 3-story fall. That's impressive. Next story. A couple years ago, my boyfriend and I went on an impromptu road trip. We packed up the car and the dogs and drove up to the far northern California redwoods. I was somewhat familiar with the area from the time I was a kid, and it seemed very adventurous just heading out without a true destination in mind. A couple nights in, we ended up meeting up with a friend of a friend, grabbing some drinks, and she invited us to crash at her house for the night. We happily took her up on the offer because it saved us from dropping money on a motel or trying to find a camping spot. She lived in a super cool looking old Victorian house. Our friend normally had 6 roommates, including several guys, but since it was summer time and most of them were students, it was only her and another female roommate plus us for the night. We drank some beers and hung out, and then went to crash. Both roommates were upstairs, and my boyfriend and I, with our dogs, were crashing out on the futon downstairs in a room that was right in front of the house off the front door. It was kind of a sitting room with a fireplace and a big bay window looking out to the front yard, which had a good cover of bushes. We both fell asleep easily and were in deep sleep until we were suddenly awakened by a doorbell ringing. Now, this is an old Victorian, so it was an old school deep ringing doorbell that you hear through the house. One of the residents of the house came down and opened the door and looked out and saw nothing, so she went back upstairs to bed. My boyfriend and I thought it was kind of weird, but you know, not our house. Maybe late night visitors were common. We fell back asleep and were then awakened again some time later by the doorbell. We heard the roommate come down again and look outside the door and then shut it. This time she walked into our room after and asked if we heard the doorbell as well. We told her we did, and we were all weirded out. We told her not to open the door if it happened again, and all came to the conclusion it must be a doorbell malfunction or something. The roommate goes back upstairs, and we fall back asleep. Next, I wake up to one of my dogs growling, the most deep-throated growl I've ever heard from him. He absolutely loves people, even if they are strangers, and we live in the downtown of a pretty major city, so having him growl at something at night is not normal. We chalk it up to being an unfamiliar house and telling him to be quiet. I fell asleep again. Next thing I know, I wake up to my boyfriend jumping out of bed and literally smacking the big bay window about 5 feet away from our bed and yelling, "There's a man's face standing in the window staring at us." My boyfriend immediately grabbed an axe. Since we had been camping, it was right at hand, and chased this guy down the street. I'm sure whoever that creep was must have shit his pants. The whole commotion woke up everyone, and we stayed up for the rest of the night keeping guard. The scariest thing to me is that the guy was probably stalking the house for quite a while. If he wanted to rob us, there's no reason to ring the doorbell multiple times. He wanted to see if it was only the girls home, depending on who came to the door. Still gives me the chills to think about it. Yeah, no, I have no idea why, but that one's got me like checking my back as I'm making this. Gotta make sure there's no one around. But man, I'm throwing that axe through the window. Like, I'm not running out of the house to chase him with the axe. I'm throwing that John straight through the window. And if it misses, well, he should be running. But then again, if I miss, now he has a weapon. But yeah, I mean, he was just hoping it was all chicks, man. Who knows what he would have done if, he wasn't stopped by that guy. Alright guys, we got ourselves quite a doozy. This one's pretty long, so let's just get straight into it. Years ago, I used to work at a church as the head sound engineer. The bulk of the job required me to be active during the day for Sunday services. Occasionally, there were tasks that could be done whenever I got the chance. One of these tasks was duplicating CDs of ceremonies for people who would like a copy to listen at home. I would get requests for various sermons, sometimes series spanning months, and have to make extra time to fulfill them, since it usually took quite a while. Since I'm a night owl, oftentimes I would head to the church and take care of these duplicate requests in the middle of the night. Never bothered me that I had a key to get in, and I had access to the church whenever I needed to. One particular night, I headed to the church sometime around 1 or 2 in the morning. Since I knew the building like the back of my hand, I rarely had to turn on lights. The ambient light from the street would illuminate through the windows just enough so that I could see where I was going. But beyond that, the building was pitch dark. Now, the way this church was laid out was there was a foyer, which then had doors into the church sanctuary, where the services held. The sanctuary had a balcony. On this balcony was the sound booth, where the CDs needed to be duplicated. There's only one door to the balcony, which could be locked from the inside, which was also located in the foyer. With a staircase leading up to it, the balcony is completely open and provides a completely unobstructed view of the sanctuary below. As far as acoustics go, the room is very good. If someone was on the stage talking, you could easily hear it from the back of the church and the balcony. If for some reason you couldn't see what you were listening to, you could easily make out what part of the room the sound was coming from. This comes into play later. When I reached the top of the stairs to the balcony and the sound booth, I turned on a light so I could begin working. Just a single bulb about 15 feet above my head. I had no need to turn on anything more than that. This was the only light in the entire sanctuary. I know that might seem crazy to some, but this was a building I had spent hundreds of hours in by myself at night. I felt completely comfortable at the time. I began duplicating CDs, lost in my thoughts and peaceful silence. After about an hour or so of silence, a sound abruptly rang out that startled me. About 20 to 30 feet ahead and below of me, in the middle of the sanctuary, on the left-hand side, I heard a distinct clink-clink sound. It was subtle but clear, and unmistakable to me. Over and over, I knew exactly what that sound was. Let me explain. In another part of the church, we had a coffee house of sorts, where people would load up on coffee and donuts every Sunday morning. The coffee was always dispensed into ceramic coffee mugs, literally the most basic, commonly used mug you can imagine. Your kitchen cupboards are likely full of them. Anyways, due to the high volume of these mugs that circulate through the church, there was always a barista from the coffee house picking them up from around the church to be washed. Oftentimes, they would miss mugs, however, and they would lay hidden around the church, as multiple mugs were usually collected in one hand. By the handle, mugs themselves would hit and make the distinct ceramic clink sound. It became regular background noise before/during after services. After about 10 years of working at this church, it's a sound I knew and recognized very well. But I would be lying if I said I ever consciously thought about that particular sound. So I found myself trying to process why I'm hearing coffee mugs clinking together in the middle of the night, in the middle of our church sanctuary, in the pitch dark. I stood there, peering from the balcony into the darkness below, trying to make sense of it for several minutes before curiosity got the best of me. I had to figure out what was making that sound. I descended the stairs and into the sanctuary where the light switches were, and I flipped them all into the on position. I immediately felt a little better and entered the sanctuary on the ground level. I had pinpointed where the ceramic sound was coming from when I was on the balcony, but unfortunately, now that I was at the source with the lights on, there was nothing to be heard. It was midweek, but the sanctuary had not yet been cleared from the previous Sunday, so I knew that there were probably a few coffee mugs still inside. People frequently left them on top of pews, underneath them, and everywhere in between. I walked down each row of pews, carefully scanning for mugs. Nothing. Knowing there would likely be some on the floor, I got down on my hands and knees in the very front of the sanctuary so I could take a peek. From this perspective, I could see underneath every pew on the respective side at once. Sure enough, there were a few mugs scattered through the floor underneath certain pews. I got up and moved to those specific pews and examined where each mug was. In hindsight, I probably should have picked them up. I didn't, because technically it wasn't my job. But I did take notes of the most important fact at the time. There were no coffee mugs in close proximity of each other. The closest was 3 or 4 feet from one another, not even remotely close enough to clink together. While I couldn't explain the sound I heard, there was no logical way for those mugs to have made that sound. I had no answers, but I was satisfied enough to brush it off. I left the sanctuary, turned off the lights at the light switch in the foyer, and returned back up to the stairs on the balcony. Immediately, by a single light bulb above me, consoled by silence, I once again found myself, and I resumed my task. About 15 minutes passed, then it happened again. Clink, clink. In the same place as before. Clink. My heart stopped, and the hairs on my neck stood up again. Clink, clink, clink. Okay, I had verified this myself. There were no mugs in enough proximity that could somehow, for the sake of the argument, be clinking on their own. There was no way they were clinking on their own. I rushed down the stairs, into the foyer, and flipped on all the lights again. Entering the sanctuary, I dropped to my knees once more and peered underneath the pews. Nothing. I knew this sound. It was unmistakable. I pinpointed where it was coming from, but there was nothing. No sound. Nothing in the disarray. No mug that could be in any contact with each other. Spooked and frustrated at the same time, I returned to the foyer. Instead of turning off all the lights, I left one of the sanctuary lights on. This meant I now had 2 lights on, one on in the balcony and one in the sanctuary. The addition of the light helped me set a better pace for myself and ease me back into my work. I locked the door from the inside this time. I don't know what was going on, and maybe I was being a little paranoid at this point, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I went up the stairs, once again, to attempt to finish my task on the balcony. About half an hour of silence had elapsed, just enough for me to settle into the idea Nothing weird was happening for the rest of the night. Then it happened again. Clink, clink. Might as well been a gunshot. I stood up and screamed from atop the balcony. There was twice as much light in there now, and enough to illuminate the room even if it was still dim. But there was nothing. Nobody was playing a prank. There were no goals, spectators, or shadow people dancing around. No big aha revelation. Clink, it continued. And so did I. I wanted to go home, so I ignored it. The sooner I finished duplicating these stupid CDs, the sooner I could get out of this damn church and get some sleep. Clink, clink, clink. Again and again. Maybe another 15 minutes. Maybe another half an hour or so. I lost track of time. All I know is that it eventually stopped. The silence returned. At one point, I was resolved that all this was ridiculous. There had to be a rational explanation, and as such, it was stupid to hold up on my locked balcony. I went downstairs to get something to drink. On my way back, I flipped off the remaining light in the sanctuary. No need to waste electricity, I reasoned. I'm not going to let some stupid sound dictate fear all night. I returned to the balcony and left the door unlocked. Illuminated once more by a singular light bulb, I popped in a few more CDs. Then it happened. I don't even know how to effectively describe it, at least in a way that captures the immediate and sheer terror of it. All at once, the entire room began to shake violently, with a deep, bassy rumble. There are no earthquakes in this part of the country, so that was immediately ruled out. Time seemed to stop as I scanned around trying to figure out what was going on. I looked at the soundboard. You know, those LEDs, they're going from green to yellow to red. The thing was maxed out in the red, indicating it was an overload of some sort. But there were no mics plugged in, no amps tuned, and no sound coming out of the speakers. I didn't even think the speakers were plugged in, and if they were muted. At the time, I had done professional audio for over 5 years, and this wasn't something technical. The entire sanctuary rumbled and shook, and in about 30 seconds, it stopped. Complete silence. I was completely shaken, and I bolted out of the church and went home. I don't have any explanation for what happened, since there were no ghostly things to show themselves or any super paranormal activity. I have tried to explain it with logic, but alas. I'm gonna be real with you guys. I don't think this story was originally written in English, because some of the grammar and punctuation just made it so hard to read. Like, I was literally, like, I probably still have mistakes that I'm just using for the take because I've tried so many times. It's just some of this grammar. I can't, the grammar, the punctuation just makes it so hard to read. But, why was he shaking? I would have left, like, as soon as I realized none of the monks were close together. I'm like, somebody's in here trying to play a prank on me. I would literally just leave. But, I guess we have time for one more story. I woke up alone in my house one day when I was fairly young, younger than 10. It was strange that there was no one in the house. My mom worked nights, but she wasn't in her room. My brother usually slept until about noon. My dad being out of the house was really the only one thing that made sense, since he'd be at work. Normally, this wouldn't bother me too much, but something just felt off. The house was too quiet. Even turning on the TV and playing music loud just made me more aware of how silent everything else was. It didn't help the day was really overcast. I eventually started feeling ill and called my mom, but no answer. Same for my dad. I called Lucas and Roy, wondering if my brothers were with their friends, but no one answered. After about an hour of feeling uneasy, I heard someone whistling from downstairs. It was very similar to what you might hear the serial killer in a horror movie whistling. I was way too fucking creeped out to investigate. I'm pretty sure I actually started crying. This time, I repeatedly dialed my parents' number over and over again. The whistling stopped. there was some laughter that sounded like it came from a toy and then started up again. I was lucky that lived just across the street from a small strip mall with a bar and a Shell station, among other stores. I also knew the neighbors well enough that I could have gone to their houses, so I decided to leave the house. As soon as I opened the door to leave, my brother from behind me asked where I was going. This freaked me out because I was sure I had been the only one in the house. I was alone. Apparently, he had thought he had been alone too. We were supposedly watching the same TV at the same time, but that was impossible. He'd heard the whistling and laughing, which brought him to leaving as well. We left the house together and decided we would go to the Shell station for at least some other human contact. Apparently, Roy had the same idea, because he came walking around the street too. I told them both my account of what happened. My brother said what was happening to him, and Roy told us he heard whistling in the streets. Everything about the day seemed surreal. The person in the Shell station seemed on edge. The bakers at the bakery didn't seem like their normal selves. Normally they're always talkative, but they just had blank expressions. They barely acknowledged us. Roy even popped into the bar and said the staff there seemed somewhat off. The three of us went from going to our school playground, and stayed there until it got dark. When we got back home, everything seemed normal. My parents didn't question where we'd been. That seemed weird. There was a weird atmosphere that was now gone as soon as the door closed behind us, and the silence that had been overwhelming earlier in the day was gone. Since things seemed normal, I explored the basement to try and locate the sound. One of the stuffed toys down there that should have been in my bed was down there. The bear couldn't have been the source of the noise because it had no music box. It didn't stay in my house much longer after that. The next day, my brother insisted it was a prank meant to scare me. That didn't make sense. There was no way he got an entire neighborhood to stop bustling throughout the day just to prank me. My dad wouldn't have ignored 20 missed calls, all one after another. The days following, my brother seemed to have forgotten it altogether. Roy told me he'd rather not talk about it. That was that. Probably just a dumb prank with a lot of weird coincidences, but still, makes my skin crawl. And that whistling is one of the worst melodies I've ever had the unpleasure of hearing in my life. 7 to 9-year-old me thinks that I wasn't really home alone. I heard scary noises, whistling, and laughter. I left home with my brothers that came out of nowhere. Meet friends who insisted he heard it too. See a total of 5 other humans all acting off, friends and bro included, until I got back home that night. Brothers call it a successful prank, proceed to forget it the next week. Friend did not want to talk about it. I am still super uneasy. Loki's still, trying to get comfortable with the whole, reading the story thing. I did fuck up a couple of times while reading that, but I kept it in because I wanted to see if I could do that one in just one long take. And since that one was kind of short and kind of boring, I kind of want to just do one more, so I lied. This will be the last one. When I graduated college, I moved back home and got a job as a morning cleaner at the local movie theater, shifts 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. The guy who interviewed me was a scruffy guy named Jeff. I remember he asked me typical questions, if I was okay with working weird hours, cleaning up vomit, etc. What struck me as odd, though, was the last question. He asked, "Do you scare easy?" I kinda laughed and then said no. The job was pretty easy, all things considered. Throw this away, mop that, scrub this, take out the garbage. You're by yourself for a majority of the shift, so we're allowed to bring our iPods with us. The theater was large. Its layout was shaped like a T, with the lobby and bathrooms in the stem. The smaller theaters on the left and the larger on the right. IMAX screens strewn out about. Running above the theater hallway was the projection area, an equally long hallway with a couple of small offices and all the projector equipment. If you were the first to arrive in the morning, you had to go up a winding staircase and turn on the lights in all the theaters. It wasn't a big deal, except with all the lights off, the building can be, as Jeff once described, a little creepy. The projector area was full of promotional material, including a sea of cardboard cutouts from all the movies that have played in the theater. Sometimes the theater managers would have a giveaway, and the staff could take home some of the items. Pretty cool, but when the lights were off, it looked like a sea of people in the hallway. Another part of the job was to meet with the day manager, who looked a little flustered when he explained to me that women were complaining about a tall, lanky man in a suit that had been following them from a theater to theater, sometimes into the bathroom even. The last several months, several had come to the front desk describing a 7-foot tall man in a black suit, complete with a bowler cap, walking slowly after them. A few times even the police were called. Teenagers that worked the day shift referring to him as the tall man. We had 12 rooms in total, but Theater 5 was the worst. Nobody wanted to clean it out. When I first started, I was fairly naive about what was going on, and I had no idea why Jeff was so apprehensive about Theater 5 and kept assigning me to clean it out. What made Theater 5 so unique was that it sat behind the bathrooms in the lobby. So to get to the seating area, you had to walk down a long hallway before reaching the screening room. Being that far back, you were the most secluded, especially when it's 4 a.m. and the only other people you're with are on the other side of the building. People cleaning there would complain of nosebleeds, headaches, and the feeling of being watched. Theater 5 always gave me an uneasy feeling, like I was being watched. One day, I was sweeping and taking out the garbage from underneath the seats when I heard footsteps. Someone running. I looked down at the front of the theater, and I catch a glimpse of a little blonde-haired boy turning the corner into the long hallway. Immediately, I threw down my broom and chased after him. I ran down the hallway and out into the lobby, where the kid had disappeared. I walked further into the lobby and saw Jeff outside the front entrance smoking. "Who was that kid?" I asked Jeff. Jeff looked at me for a moment and was confused. Then he laughed. "Oh, so you met Charlie." Charlie was another entity customer complained about on several occasions. They claimed a little blonde-haired boy was running up and down the aisles in the theater, causing all kinds of noise and ruckus during the movie. Of course, it was in Theater 5. When an usher would come to apprehend the child, he'd be gone. The female staff affectionately named him Charlie, after his resemblance to the Charlie in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Charlie was also responsible for knocking several garbage cans over, misplacing things, and making our janitorial duties a pain in the ass. We used to theorize that he was one of the sons of the tall man, but the two were never seen together. It took that experience for Jeff to admit that some people have seen and heard some things, which was his way of saying the theater was haunted. I found it odd, considering the theater was relatively new. It was built in the 90s on some wetland. According to some people that lived in the area, the property was owned by a family who sold it off back in 1980s. There was no evidence of foul play. It wasn't an Indian burial ground. It was just a weird place where strange things happened. The theater basement was used for storage. I'd give a better description, but that's as much as I know. I never went down there. I remember that Jeff gave me a couple of bags and told me to drop them off in the basement. I said I didn't know where it was. He pointed down the hall. Last door on the left, he replied. I started walking. He stopped me. Don't go down there by yourself, he added. There's a lot of shit down there, and I don't want you tripping over anything. This morning, it was Jeff, myself, and a coworker named Trevor. Trevor was on the other side of the building, cleaning out a theater. I could hear his leaf blower running. We used them to blow popcorn out of the theaters. I didn't want to bother walking across the building to grab him. Jeff walks out of the lobby to have a smoke. I'm by myself at the far end of the dark hallway. I open the door, and I'm looking at a long staircase that drops into darkness. I flip on the light switch to my left. There was only a flickering light at the bottom of the steps. Nobody ever wanted to go down there and fix the light. I heard a door open from the lobby. Jeff hadn't returned. I'm sure I'm just hearing things. I look back down the staircase. I'm about to descend when I hear a voice from the bottom of the steps say, "Hey!" It's a low, raspy voice. I pause. "Hey," it says again. There's a shadow bleeding in from the bottom of the staircase. I can't tell what it is, but it's definitely a person. "Hello?" I call down. I don't know why I did. I know that I'm the only person on this half of the building. I know that there isn't just some person hiding out in a dark basement. At this point, my heart is pounding, and I'm starting to sweat, because I know this isn't normal, and I'm experiencing something that shouldn't be happening. "You gotta see this. Come here and look," it says again. The voice is a little louder. It sounds like someone with a cold. The shadow is bleeding further into the bottom of the steps. Whatever down there is coming closer. I toss the bags down to the bottom of the steps, turn off the light, and walk back down the lobby. Jeff is walking back inside. I tell him about what happened. He almost looks irritated when I tell him I was going by myself. "Nothing here is going to hurt you," he said finally. I will never not be shocked at how casually he was about the whole thing. Later on, I told Trevor about what had happened. We went back to the steps to investigate, and when I turned on the flickering light, the bags I had thrown were gone. Nothing was quite as bad as my experience with the projector area around 6 a.m. We would take a 30-minute break. Jeff and Trevor would usually go to McDonald's to eat, but it was always too early for me, so I'd lay in the hallway and listen to my iPod. No matter how loud I turned up my music, I could never cancel out the sound of footsteps from the projector area. It sounds like a 300-pound linebacker sprinting back and forth, heavy, loud thumps up and down the hall above me. I told Jeff about it once. He remarked that it was just the building settling, and there was a lot of equipment upstairs making all sorts of noise. I'd hear voices echoing down the hall from the projector room, Theater 5, or down the hall. That was easily ignored when I put my headphones on. But I never shook the feeling that I was being watched. My only experience with the tall man was at the start of my shift, when I was the first to arrive at work. If you're the first, it's your job to go upstairs and turn on the theater lights in the projector hall. I wasn't happy about it, but it looked like I was going to be another morning where Jeff and Trevor were late, and I didn't want to fuck up my shift by waiting around. Since the projector area was dark, we'd carry a flashlight with us while we're going around flipping switches. That morning, I couldn't find my flashlight. So, I walked through the dark hallway of the projectors, flipping on the switches as I came across them. I stayed up the entire night prior watching the Andy Griffin Show. I remember this because I was whistling the theme song to myself as I walked down the corridor. Once again, I got that feeling of being watched. And something several yards away, in the area with the projectors overlooking the IMAX theater rooms, was staring back at me. I stopped whistling and tried to focus my eyes. It was a cardboard cutout. They were everywhere, so I kind of dismissed it. And I was about to flip the next switch when the cutout moved. I froze. It was a figure hunched over. It was quietly whistling, imitating me. Slowly it rose up from its crouch, revealing itself to be at least 7 feet tall. It was a man. All I could see was his silhouette against the red exit sign light and some of the projector computer's monitors. It staggered towards me, whistling quietly. I wanted to move, but for some reason my feet were cemented in the spot, and I had cotton for a tongue. I didn't know what to do. Slowly the tall man stepped towards me. He walked with a bit of a waddle, as if he had a limp in his left leg. I couldn't exactly tell. He had taken 3 or 4 steps toward me when something caught his attention, and he turned and walked into the office down the hall. After that, I put in my 2 weeks, and I haven't looked back. Okay, this one hit a little too close to home for my liking. Obviously, YouTube's not my job. I work at a movie theater, and oh my gosh. Now, Auditorium 5 isn't haunted, but Auditorium 12, let me tell you, it's haunted. And I hate that we have the same amount of theaters, like the building, like I can imagine this story happening in my building, and I don't like it. Because now I'm going to think of this story every time I'm in that building. Anyways, guys, that is all the stories I have for you today. If you do enjoy this style of content, please tell me down in the comments below, or you can tell me by leaving a like and subscribing. That works as well. And I really hope to make more of these. I enjoyed reading these stories, and maybe if you guys want to put some stories down in the comments, I'll read them as well. Anyways, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.